Major flooding event continues in the Philippines and things could get worse further north on tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for January 13th. Right now the world is still relatively quiet with no active storms, no named storms or anything to that effect, but we are watching several disturbances that all have chances of development over the next 5 days. Code blue right now is our operations status, and that's for the Philippines where there is a disturbance causing lots of flooding issues right now. 139 days until hurricane season begins in the North Atlantic, and this is how it looks right now, very quiet, apart from that front moving through the United States which has caused some serious severe weather issues earlier today. The Pacific looks like this. There's 10% chance right now. Off the coast of the Philippines, those chances are dropping, but you can see all that convection over it, certainly producing a lot of precipitation. Moving down to the Indian Ocean, we have a 40% chance. That was 50% yesterday, but the chances have gone down a little bit because the other area of interest to the west of it is starting to pick up, certainly in terms of the models, and it's now looking much less likely that the one on the right hand side will be the one that actually dominates. A very complicated situation there. And in the South Pacific, two areas of interest now. We've marked both of the ones that we've been watching on models for a time, one near the French Polynesian Islands and one just south of Fiji on the very edge of the map there at the international date line. Two 10% chances there. Let's check how the satellite imagery has looked in the last 24 hours. Look out for the red zones to see where there's been a lot of precipitation. Looks like the Philippines is the hotspot, and a few other locations across the world of note as well. A few fronts moving through. West coast of the United States, I think, is one to highlight there as well. But here's a close-up on this disturbance, which, to be honest with you, is looking pretty decent compared to yesterday. Not really in terms of rotation, but certainly a lot more convective activity, huge amounts compared to yesterday, I think. Might just be because it's zoomed in a little bit more this time around, but you can see all across the northern Visayas into southern Luzon, lots of convection and precipitation is bound to be falling underneath there right now. Serious concerns for that entire region. The Bicol region and Catanduanes certainly getting in for possibly the worst for the next few days. Models have trended up again, so we are looking at potentially gigantic amounts of rainfall over the next 7 days, so keep watching for the updates on that as we zoom out one. There's lots of flood warnings, extreme flood warnings in effect for a few of those areas, extending as far south as I forgot the name already. Mindanao. Sorry about that. Yes, I get confused sometimes with Mindoro and Mindanao, but Mindoro, yes, they'll be getting quite a bit of rainfall as well. But there's the system, slowly progressing in a generally northwesterly direction. The northern side has a lot more precipitation. It certainly doesn't really look like anymore it's going to get a rotation and a center of circulation going. But there's the system zoomed out on the air mass imagery. There's another little one to the right hand side of it as well, but that's not going to produce much, and a massive frontal band extending off towards the east there, all across the western Pacific Ocean, and really interesting to look at on satellite imagery if you get a chance to look at the visible later on. So that is clear to see the effects of the moisture on that main disturbance over the Philippines really showing up there with those colours. Let's just look down south as well across the equator to the Australian region. You can see a few thunderstorms blowing up there over northern Australia, and on the right hand side there's that system near Fiji, if you look carefully, which has acquired a little bit of rotation, but it's not going to last very long. Let's check sea surface temperatures around the world then. Look out for temperatures of 79 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. That's 26 Celsius. That's good enough for storm formation. And you can see quite a lot of that occurring in the central and eastern Pacific and across the Caribbean as well. Temperatures are up there, but obviously the situation isn't really calling for a tropical cyclone in this zone, as it should be at this time of year. The North Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea there, decent temperatures near the equator. The southwestern Indian Ocean is primed and ready for significant storm activity with temperatures well up into the high 20s, 28, 29 degrees Celsius near Madagascar, out in the open ocean around 27. And that extends all across to the Australian region. There's still a little bit of a cool pool to the west of Western Australia, but not as much as it was earlier, and temperatures around the northern part of Australia into the Gulf of Carpentaria still sky high, 29 degrees and probably more in some places. Around the South Pacific and Fiji, 26 to 27 degrees. To the east of Fiji, around 27 to 28. The Western Pacific looking good as well, and quite a clear divide there, a threshold on the northern side, and it's 27 to 28 degrees Celsius in the main areas for tropical cyclone formation, and in the South China Sea also looking fairly good, especially further east. Let's check the sea surface temperature anomalies. And the Western Pacific is above average, still that cool area near Australia. Temperatures are still good, but they are below average. That's what the blue areas demonstrate. The yellow and orange areas are above average. The Atlantic well above average right now as well, just for your notification there. And in the South Pacific, it is generally above average as well. Oceanic heat content looks like this, a decent plume of bright colours there in the deep tropics, extending pretty much as far as Fiji and southern Vanuatu. Good conditions there, and in the Western Pacific they extend quite a bit to the north as well. You know, it's actually increased a little bit actually near Guam there, those temperatures creeping back in. Well, these aren't temperatures, it's oceanic heat content, it's amount of energy in the water there, and how far down the heat goes that often determines how strong tropical cyclones can get. Alright then, let's take a look at the models, and this is how it's looking on the GFS for the next 5 days. Looking at this system near the Philippines, you can see the winds aren't particularly strong, but you can clearly see that rotation in the first 3 days or so before it gets sort of warped into that linear line there that's encroaching from the north. And so that's really the extent of what we're seeing there. It'll show a lot more on the rainfall charts. Look towards the southwest Indian Ocean and look out for those two potential systems. And the GFS has really jumped ship on the eastern one, and it now wants the western one to be the dominant cyclone. The eastern one still forms briefly, but look at how big that western one gets, and that completely changes the complexion of what happens now. Because if it is that western system that does end up forming, it will be weaker, it will be much larger, and it will move into northern Madagascar rather than sweep down towards the south. And this is the Australian South Pacific region. Look out for some potential systems here in the 5-day period where we're looking off the east coast of Australia maybe. Could be rumblings of a formation, and not far from Vanuatu. There it is near the end of that 5-day period, getting strength quite quickly there, moving through the islands of Vanuatu towards the southeast. So two areas that we could be watching out for later on in that forecast period, as well as those two short range ones that we're looking at that have low chances. And take a look at the Philippines now. This is where we have serious concerns right now as we take a look at these colours really getting elevated, and this time it is over land, so it's shifted westwards from what we saw in earlier forecasts, and it is regrettable to tell you that we are now looking at extremely high amounts of rain over parts of the south of Luzon and southeastern Luzon, with possible land area rainfall totals reaching 800 millimeters in further rainfall on top of what we've already seen. Potentially 33 inches there on Catanduanes. That's just over 800 millimeters, and still high amounts elsewhere all around the southeastern part of Luzon over towards Masbate and many of those other locations 300 millimeters. In the longer range, this is day 5 through 10. It's a borderline hurricane equivalent landfall there in northern Madagascar, but look at the size of that wind field, and it really ends up becoming a big conglomerated mess, and then eventually another cyclone forms out the right hand side, probably to do with the same energy as that eastern system that we're currently tracking, that the 40% system, and there it is, reforming out of some energy there and continuing southeastwards past Mauritius and probably over Rodrigues. This is the South Pacific. Significant intensification there of that cyclone that moves south of Fiji and heads towards the southeast, and then that second cyclone comes in its following in its footsteps, much weaker by the time it gets to New Caledonia after moving through the south not the South China Sea, the Coral Sea, and then that third system that may end up forming off the coast of the Cape York Peninsula there in Queensland, and you can see it there, a much smaller system, but like we've already seen numerous times, it could change at the drop of a hat. That's all the serious stuff done. You can take a look at the Force 13 merch store by scanning that barcode and taking a look at all of what we have to offer, including full season individual storm animations bespoke on request and our still waiting for Hone t-shirt. In the Scilly range then, this is day 10 through 16. You can see what else happens with that cyclone. It's doing a bit of a loop and it really gets absorbed into, I mean, what on earth is going on there? A huge system loses its structure, not tropical by that point, and it really is a massive mess. Imagine seeing that happen. Just looking at that wind profile really tells you what a insane structure that system would have. Almost tropical there, as it just loses it as it moves gradually southeastwards. Really fascinating look at that double system that ends up fusing into one. And what happens in the Pacific? That system's still going near New Caledonia. The Australian one moves inland very quickly, and not much else happens after that, I don't think. Maybe something else right near the very end of that 16-day period, but it certainly could be a busy phase in the South Pacific. Nothing else after that, but keep watching that space, especially when we get to day 5 through 10, because we could get lots of activity. But in the same breath, we might not, because the models, they can get it very wrong. The 2022 Atlantic hurricane season, what might have been, looks like this. These are all the names. Well, it's nearly here. The 2022 Atlantic what might have been animation tries to tell you what the models would have thought of the season, and that premieres on Friday night. Well, what happened on January the 13th around the world, around the ages? In 2015, it was the turn of Cyclone Bansi, which reached Category 5 status as it was moving towards the southeast and was certainly threatening the Mascarene Islands. I remember tracking that one as well. It was certainly a remarkable storm, very powerful, and some fantastic International Space Station images. If you're wondering about one particularly famed picture of lightning in the eye that they managed to capture, that's where it came from, Cyclone Bansi. And Tropical Depression 1W would become Mekhala later on. Back to today, and in the Atlantic, the first name on this year's naming list will be Arlene. In the Eastern Pacific, Adrian. And in the Central Pacific, our first name, since forever, is going to be Hone. Who knows when that might happen. In the Western Pacific, the next name is Sanvu. Doesn't look like we're going to get it out of this current system. And in the North Indian Ocean, our next name there is Mocha. 2 storms so far, if you count the second coming of Ellie earlier on. Last year we saw 93 in the end. In the Southern Hemisphere, Freddie is next up in the Australian region, Chaniso in the Southwest Indian Ocean, and Irene in the South Pacific. That's all from tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin, and we'll be back again tomorrow night.